Devil May Cry 5 is a good action game. At least I think so. A triumphant return after an 11-year wait following Devil May Cry 4. The only release is in between being a disappointing outsourced spin-off and a surprise special edition. Just a little over a year later, and Devil May Cry 5 now has its own special edition, just in time to launch with a new generation of hardware. Now, the original experience is there fully intact. There's no deviation to the original campaign, which, if you don't know, follows the story of the Devil May Cry demon hunters Dante and Nero, as well as a mysterious man named V, as they attempt to defeat Urizen, the new Demon King, and remove the giant demonic tree he currently resides in. Devil May Cry 5 is the ending of a long-running story in the series, so the game doesn't waste much time in trying to remind you who these people are, but included in the game's gallery mode is a video that goes over the history of the series. So if you didn't feel like going back and playing through this solid series that is available on nearly everything, and were looking for a crash course, it's here. Much like the story, core gameplay remains the same. Dante, Nero, and V all have their own unique movesets. There are multiple enemies and bosses you'll end up fighting, and everything plays just like in the original, with you comboing your way through hordes of demons as stylishly as possible, spurred on by adaptive, dynamic music. This new release doesn't adjust any of the sticking points you may have had with the first. The camera is still a little wonky, some of the environments are hard to read, and you may or may not hate V's segments of the game. So what exactly changed? To start, let's get performance and graphics out of the way. For clarity's sake, I'm playing on the Xbox Series X. The game now supports higher resolutions, up to 4K currently, and unlocked frame rates, as well as two different ray tracing modes, one with a focus on fidelity and the other on performance, a familiar trend. However, you can't utilize all of them at once, and ray tracing will be disabled if you activate high frame rate mode, or the new gameplay modes I'll be talking about in a bit. And high frame rate mode will understandably be locked if your monitor has a refresh rate lower than 120Hz. Having played around with each of the options, they all run stably. Only the ray tracing graphics mode infrequently but noticeably dropping the frame rate below 60 during dense combat or scenes with heavy effects. When it did, it remained stable and did not affect gameplay. So for what it's worth, if the game is dropping frames, I didn't notice, leaving it running somewhere between 60 and 120 frames for most of the experience. Overall, the game runs well and looks nice in all modes, and ray tracing as an option is a nice touch even if it doesn't fully convince in every environment. Devil May Cry 5 already looked really good and never had any nasty performance issues, but there's one definitive benefit for playing on next-gen hardware, and that is the loading times, which are cut down substantially regardless of the settings, down to about 1/20th the time. From playing the original, my muscle memory had adapted to putting the controller down while I was waiting for levels to load. Here in Special Edition, the level would load before the controller hit the desk. This vast improvement should come as no surprise given the change in hardware. But all this tech aside, gameplay is where the real changes come in, with 3 major additions. In Special Edition, we see the return of the legendary Dark Knight difficulty, which drastically increases the amount of enemies on screen. Even in some of the more mundane encounters, compared to the previous titles, it does seem slightly more difficult, and they really pushed how many enemies can be on screen while still being playable. And it is a delight, whether you wanted more fodder to tear through or a different arrangement of enemies. Secondly, there is a turbo mode, which as the name implies, speeds everything up, running at 1.2 times normal speed. This is a fun adjustment if you wanted to really test yourself, or if you just wanted to pump out as many combos as fast as possible, chaining and canceling moves quicker than in normal play. And just like everything else, it feels good. It really seems like they found that sweet spot for the speed. Last, but certainly not least, Dante's brother Vergil returns in a playable capacity with the aptly named Vergil mode, which has you play the entire campaign as him. The only omission being the cameo system, which connected you to players playing the same mission from a different perspective. Not a game changer, but it's worth noting. You'll see a few events from his perspective, and there are a few treats and surprises in there for fans of the series, but it is otherwise light on new story content and cutscenes. He's equipped with a familiar 3-weapon arsenal and moveset, but he has a handful of new tricks, each weapon having at least one new move. His concentration meter, which buffs up his moves, now favors aggressiveness more than before, increasing when dodging and teleporting to enemies. His standard Devil Trigger buff is replaced by Doppelganger, creating a clone that copies your inputs and skills with the default weapon, the Yamato. And you are able to adjust how quickly the clone reacts to your inputs mid-game, giving it greater versatility and letting you get creative. Overall, Vergil is a blast to play, but there's a little bit of jank, mainly when using Vergil's trick technique. The tracking on this move is tenacious, so occasionally he'll get hung up in transit when colliding with certain objects, and sometimes his trick seems to extend beyond its normal range, although I'd list that as a positive. But with the pace of the game being what it is, this is simultaneously minor and noticeable. You won't be halted for long, but it definitely stands out if you played the first release, or any of Vergil's appearances. It just stands out. That covers all major gameplay changes, and the nice thing about everything I mentioned, you can utilize them all at once. Vergil mode being its own separate campaign, Legendary Dark Knight mode being a difficulty, and Turbo mode being a setting, so you are free to go nuts. But as I touched on before, playing in either Legendary Dark Knight or Turbo mode will lock you out of the ray tracing options. That's the gist of it. Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition is an expanded version of an already top-class action game, with multiple playstyles and satisfying combat, wrapped up in a well-presented package. The new additions to gameplay content is a net positive, but new story content is very light, and while this won't win over anyone dissatisfied with the first release, for fans of the original, the series, and the genre, this is a winner, and the definitive way to play one of the few quality action experiences from the last decade.